Hi, this is Tim Lightfellow with Kingdom Volunteer again. And this is the second part of the cresting videos, which is actually showing the process of painting. One thing I will highlight is I had shown in the previous video about having cresting patterns in the fletches. One thing you definitely want to be careful of there is keeping the amount of paint as minimal as you can, because if you have large ridges or bumps there, then when you try to glue the fletching on, that won't stick well, and you can end up with having problems with fletching coming loose. So just a little bit of a heads up on that. Now, for this, I have one of my test sticks set up. The cresting jig that has a motor here that spins the shaft. It has a bar here that helps keep the pressure on the shaft fairly evenly to keep it spinning. This particular model has wheels here, 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 and back behind this, and those can be adjusted and moved around on this model so that you can get the best straightest spin so that your pattern looks the nicest possible. This also has a stopper at this end. It is actually off the camera. Let me shift it. This has a stopper here, so you can unscrew this and adjust where you want the end of that shaft to be so that you can make sure that you're painting your pattern where you want to be without painting where any of the wheels are, because as I've experienced firsthand, when you lose track of that and put paint there, it gets on the wheels, and then it gets on every other shaft you put on there until the paint's dry. So definitely want to be careful not to paint where any of the wheels are spinning. Okay, so the first example I'm going to show is using the, let's see if I can show this without it being too close to the camera. This is red acrylic leather paint from Angelus. As I mentioned in my other video about knowing your paints and your finishes so you know what works together, this tends to be very liquidy. I've actually got a lot more here than I intended to, which will work fine. I just need to definitely demonstrate what I explained in the video. So I'm using the top of the ruler as my guide to line up where I want this. And what I'm doing is I'm just pushing it slowly towards the shaft until I see the paint showing up where I want it. And then I slowly pull it away from the shaft. And you'll notice a fairly decent even coat. Most of the solid color paints, a single coat will work. I'll turn that off so you can see it better without it spinning. The Angelus, as I mentioned, has a higher moisture content than any other paint I've worked with. It does need 24 hours to dry, and it typically takes 2 coats because as it dries, you end up seeing areas where the dye in the paint was not as thick as it was in others, so it'll end up being uneven. The red is honestly the one exception. It seems to coat really well with 1 coat. Okay, I am cleaning up the brush fast to pick a different color. And what I will show you with that, this happens to be a metallic amethyst. And this is a different brand, so it tends to go on. not as high moisture content. It tends to dry faster. Also, if you watch, if I push the brush in too fast, what you end up doing is literally, you'll notice that it's pushed, especially on the right edge, it pushed all the paint out to the edge of the brush, and you end up with ridges there in areas without the paint. So that was one of the things I mentioned, is you want to make sure you slowly push the brush in to put the paint on. And even now with this color, it's gonna not go on evenly, so this one would take probably 2 coats. But that demonstrates what can happen, and if you have thicker paints, you can end up with quite a thick ridge out on the edge, and which can really impact what you're trying to do, and especially if you're going back over it to do thin lines and you have this big ridge, it can push your highlight paint around and make it not go on the way you wanted it to. Plus, as mentioned previously with crossbow bolts, if that's what you're doing, if you have one bolt with an extra thick ridge of paint, it could end up making that one fly differently than the others that you're using. Okay, so with the still going, I'm going to grab some silver paint, and so what I have here, and I'm again hoping the camera shows this well, if I can not put it right in front of the spring. So I've got silver paint just barely on the tip of this. This is my thin line brush. And again, what I'm going to do is when I'm doing thin lines, I'll often actually brace the brush with my other hand, because that way if I suddenly move, it's not going to have as much of an impact. And I, again, very slowly slide in towards the shaft until I start seeing it painting a line. And we have a line. And a lot of times on the metallics, especially silver and gold, I didn't notice it so much with copper, if you ever work with copper paint, but you will typically need to do 2 or 3 coats, especially if you're looking for that nice bright metallic look. And what I'm seeing on that brush is I just got too much paint on it. So I'm not going to try. I'm going to reset and do it again, because I don't want to suddenly try and do it with too much paint and force a really wide line. So one of the tricks here is knowing your brush and being able to tell where it's going to touch so that you can make sure you're painting on top of it. You'll notice now, if it shows in the video, that I've actually now got a double line because the bristles of the brush actually curved off to the side and didn't put the paint in the same spot. This particular brush is very near to its end of life. Let's see if I can do this again. And hopefully, unfortunately, I'm not sure the silver line is going to show that well on the camera. Let's see. I'm going to move the camera to try and give you a closer view. So just to review some of the tips and tricks here before I do that, you want to have some sort of pattern or guide, whether it's a paper taped on that has your pattern, a ruler, something that helps you make sure you're putting the paint where you want it, getting the width you want, and laying out your pattern. And when you're putting the brush towards the arrow or crossbow bolt shaft, you want to slowly approach until you start seeing the paint pulling off the brush and onto the shaft, rather than pushing the brush up against it, because when you push the brush up against it, it spreads the paint out rather than allowing you to have a controlled line or location where you're putting the paint. So I'm going to move the camera now, and for the silver, honestly, it's not showing up on the camera. Let me turn this light away, maybe it'll show up a little better. So the silver line's right there, and honestly, for what I'm seeing, I would actually want to do a third coat to make it stand out. Silver on blonde wood is not always going to stand out the greatest anyway. It's often better on a color, blue, black, whatever. But I have had other silvers that are a little bit brighter that have shown up pretty well. This one particular one, learning experience for me, not so great. Anyway, this hopefully gives you some tips and tricks on helping you get started with doing cresting. As always, you can feel free to comment on my posts or reach out to me on Facebook if you have any questions. I hope this helps. Thank you.